So, when it comes to the cyberpunk setting, most people have kind of an idea of what Night City looks like from the view of, 2077. And when you look at the setting of cyberpunk itself and the genre better, looking at all these different parts of what makes up the genre of cyberpunk, you have to take a few things into consideration. Today, we will be talking about getting the scene down and making your world, your city, really feel much more towards the cyberpunk genre. And what I say is merely just opinion, what my thoughts are on the matter. But I've been GMing Cyberpunk for about 3 years. My name's Diamond Dust, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So, you've picked up Cyberpunk Red, and maybe your only knowledge of, I'm not sure what to call the setting itself, but basically Night City. Because there's all sorts of different cyberpunk settings, including how Deus Ex has Detroit, and Detroit seems to be another hotspot for dystopian media. But we're gonna be looking at someplace like Night City, where Night City in 2077, it does. There's just a lot of bad going on. There's people pissing in the street. There's people just tossing their trash out, and it gets piled up. I mean, look at Dogtown. Dogtown, I'd say, is probably at the big extreme. That's a combat. But when you are trying to create the setting, what are you looking for? So in 2045, we're looking at just a little over 22 years after the bomb, which happened in 2023. So when you look at the setting of 2045, if you've looked at the map, which actually I'll pull it up here on the book even, if you look at the map in the core rulebook, and excuse my hand, sometimes my hand tracker gets a little buggy every once in a while and thinks my hand is a little different. Don't mind that. On page 310, you have the key places of Night City. You have different zones, though, that really help you get an idea of how to set the portrayal of each part of the setting. So you have the executive zone. You have the rebuilding urban zones, overpacked suburbs, combat zones, the hot zone, and the reclaimed perimeter as different areas to describe. And when it comes to pulling these different settings together, what do they all look like? How do they all differ from each other? Because we don't really get we don't really get a close view on how the world looks in some cases. And we don't have a lot of specific buildings. We don't have maps of very specific neighborhoods, just the far and few between where certain locations are, on page 310. So a way that I like to help pull that image together, we're going to take, for example, looking at the Encounters in the Red. Encounters in the Red on page 417 in the core rulebook really does a good job of painting what kind of people you'll come across. So, the corporate threat rating, this will very often be the executive zone and also the rebuilding areas. And you'll come across local law enforcement, corporate guards, techs, suits, uh, just locals even that are just out rebuilding the city in those parts of the area that are getting the magic touch. Hot zone and combat threat ratings, you're going to be looking at like the later ends of these different tables, where you'll have cyber psychos, solo teams, booster gangs, straight up gang wars going on at certain times of night. And it varies throughout the different parts of the table, and there's even suggestions for how different groups appear. And another way to really look at it, and this is the one that I really wanted to hammer home today, is setting up the cyberpunk world so that way it looks and smells, yeah, that's right, smell, here, well, it sounds, it smells, it looks a very, very, very horrible, but yet charming way. I fell in love with the 2045 setting because of the fact that there is so much that the players have to fight for in order to just survive. And compared to 2077, where everything's just kind of back to normal, almost. I'm not going to dog on 2077 too much, but 2045 produces challenges with a loss in the supply chain. You don't have just your local big box store that you can just go down to go get. You don't have all the different stores that you can just go pick up your high dollar items. You have to go to fixers, and those fixers have to go to nomads, which they talk about in Black Chrome in the back in Economics 101, where they talk about how all that works. Great. That does have a little bit to do with what we got going on here. Cyberpunk is normally done in the urban environment. This will usually be the heart of the city, alleyways, beat up streets with apartment buildings that probably have bars on the windows. You've got, in the Time of the Red, combat zones that sprawl throughout the southern part of the proper city, where the cops just won't go at night. You're not going to get a taxi in the combat zone, or sometimes, well, more often than not, the metro is going to be down just as much as it is up. And also the weather. Usually what really paints that environment, and you see it a lot, especially like in the classic movie Blade Runner, which is part of the cyberpunk filmography that they recommend on page 389. Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2045, rain is a very common trope that they use, and you even see it in Ghost in the Shell and The Matrix, especially when things get tense, when you hit that point where everything's going to the wall. And other things about the urban environment, there should just be trash everywhere, big piles of trash even in some places. And also on the days when it doesn't rain, maybe it's foggy or smog, and maybe you'll also have weird other weather going on, which is featured in the DLC, Night City weather. And animals, well, animals really don't exist in the setting of 2045, the most that do exist are, well, synthetic. And of course, there are children. And that's something that's discussed in Danger Gal dossier on how you want to integrate children. And they even talk about it in the original core rulebook, that they're laughing at things that, you know, we would just be absolutely thrown off by. And, you know, guns are going to be a commonplace, drugs are going to be commonplace. In the case of like cyberpunk settings, you're going to have people that are just always openly out on the street, very inebriated or impaired. They're just going to be, you know, on drugs, on alcohol, and sex sells. You see that a lot in Cyberpunk 2077, and it applies a lot where you'll see things like this where that is a topic that's brought up. I mean, hell, there's even a known person in the combat zone as Mr. Stud. Yes, named after the product even. And he is a BD star. Another thing is paranoia. Nobody should be able to trust anyone in these kinds of settings. There's never going to be like a black and white, you know, good guy, bad guy situation. And also, you know, maybe your party is going to have to do things that are going to be in poor taste in order to complete their job. And maybe the villains do things that are good. Now you're conflicted with, like, do I stop them from doing what they're doing that's bad because it's going to take away all this good that they're doing for the community? And even then, heroes and villains, that's just a label you give yourself. You could be the villain in someone else's story, for all you know. And maybe that person that you trust is going to sell you out the next week. Contrast. Contrast is it's important in painting the picture of the different kinds of folks. There are the haves and the have-nots. There's really no in between. Like you even see it in like Deus Ex, you know, the people that have things and the people that don't have things. There's a very clear cut line. And even in Cyberpunk, you have, you know, the wealthy who sit in their ivory towers up on their citadels above everything. Mr. Tyrell from the Tyrell Corporation in Blade Runner had this big, beautiful bedroom. And had like all the lap of luxury that he could afford. He never had to see the street, like what Deckard saw, where people were crowded, crawling over the top of each other. Things should be cold and hungry and desperate out on the street. And this is a topic of contention sometimes at tables. And for me, I'm fine with the fact that this is something that does happen in the setting. But I know for some players, they don't like it being so rough. So it's up to you and your table on like how extreme you want to make things. With me, it is possible to get what you're looking for, but you're not going to find the real expensive stuff. There's going to be some times where things are just going to be out of stock, and you're going to need a fixer that knows where to find it. Also, just take time to learn the world. Do androids dream of electric sheep? I care to say it's basically one of the fathers of the cyberpunk setting. That's by Philip K. Dick, which there's even a reference to Philip. It's the tattoo on Rebecca's leg. And also Neuromancer William Gibson wrote a lot of books that, I recommend. They'd make for good reads. Snow Crash, my girlfriend recommended. Take time to read, take in cyberpunk media. Cyberpunk Edgerunners, honestly, that is a really good representation of like what it's like to be an edge runner in this time, where you run along the edge of haves and have-nots. Some days you're riding high, other days you're struggling. And of course, when you do set up these settings, it really kind of depends on what kind of team you're playing. Let me see. What do they reference for setting the mood here? The third trick to running cyberpunk: the atmosphere. Get out your heaviest rock tapes, which, I mean, if we still have tapes, that's pretty cool. Some people have rediscovered cassette tapes, and I feel old about it, but that's neither here nor there. Use slang, street slang, or even like in Blade Runner, street speak. That's a language in its own. Use street slang. Use neon lighting. Neon lights are a very, very big, loud, and obvious trope in cyberpunk, but there's a reason for it. Think of all the advertising that uses neon. It catches people's attention. But as soon as everything becomes neon, it all kind of just makes this setting where it's just washed out. And also, we got some other things out there. The smell that you should be getting is, the bodies in the gutter, the trash, the backed up sewage, the struggling, like, industrial smells. It should make it hard to breathe sometimes. The food? Well, if you close your eyes, it might be beef. It's probably just gonna be synthetic meat. With a few additives, of course. And also, what are some other things? Just in the year 2045, traffic is kind of weird. There is some vehicular traffic, but that's going to be primarily in the rebuilding urban zones, compared to other places where you're so poor that having a car, you're considered wealthy when you have a car. But you'll hear, chatter of crowds out on the street, the patter of feet on the sidewalk, rain falling down over the buildings, water running out of the downspouts. Sometimes maybe music really sets the tone that you're looking for. Kavinsky is, I think Kavinsky is like a music artist that even Artal recommends in the book. But like, look for like dark synth, like synthwave, dark synth, rock. Find what really sets that mood. Personally, for me, like some of the artists I personally recommend, and I'm not, endorsed by them and whatnot. I just recommend like Vector 7, The Midnight, Kavinsky, Carl Casey from White Bat Audio, Dance with the Dead. Ooh, gosh, what other stuff do I have on here? There's a whole variety out there. Scandroid. Scandroid's a big one. That is definitely part of the setting. I suppose another thing is the violence. It's the dark future. Everybody's hungry. Everybody's struggling. Everybody wants to get what they need. And they're going to do things. They are going to do things that will be a little unimaginable, or not unimaginable, but unfathomable to us. For example, let's look at the opening to Cyberpunk 2077. After Jackie helps you get back up onto your feet, or you and Jackie get up onto your feet, you're going to a scab haunt. These people rip like cybernetics or organic parts out of people's bodies to sell to make money. That's just what scabbers do. Some people smuggle, traffic people, traffic drugs. Cops sometimes, to make an extra buck because the police department's not paying enough, they'll take bribes. Security personnel, same way. You know, they're just trying to make a living. Edge runners, they'll take on jobs that might be questionable. I got put on a job that Emeron wrote. And I'm not going to spoil it too terribly much, but it has to do with us having to make some very tough decisions if we have the fate of someone's life in our hands. Whether it, you know, and we have to decide, do we give him back or do we hand him off to someone else? We have so many decisions that we have to make in regards to this person. It is so hard to do, especially when you see what happened to this person. So, of course, people are going to do things like that. You know, gangers, they're fighting for turf. So that way they have those resources. Like Iron Sights and Red Chrome, they fight for turf over the old combat zone. Think of all the scrap that's there to make them better stuff. Maelstrom and Tiger Claws were fighting for old Japantown in one of the other stories that Artal released. Everyone has their motivations for what they do, and it's primarily around money or things that they need. So GMs especially, make it personal. You know, put it on the line that, you know, these guys need that in order to live. So at the end of the day, when you put together your cyberpunk setting, look at the urban environments, find what really appeals and screams out to you. Take that, make it your own. Always make it your own. Make it something that you like. Something that's comfortable for everyone. And make sure that you really put that strain on the characters that they have to make ends meet. Especially in like a time like 2045 where everybody's struggling to survive. You're not special. You're not some legendary hero. You are just another edge runner trying to make a living in this setting. But at the end of the day, make sure everyone's having fun. Always make sure everyone's having fun with the setting. I like to check in on my players because I know sometimes I like to get a little carried away, but that's just part of like what I do with my setting is I like to take it to the extremes. So, until then, folks, I hope you guys have a wonderful time with whatever games you play. If you want to pick up Cyberpunk Red, go check out our Talsorian games. I'll even throw their link in the description below. And as always, be safe out there. Bye!